Hi guys, it's Vanessa coming to you from the garden in Central Texas, Zone 9A, on the edge of Zone 8B, just northwest of Austin in the suburbs. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what I do to connect these irrigation grids in my raised bed garden to my house on an irrigation timer. All of the pieces that I use to get everything connected that you can get locally from stores near you, like Lowe's and Home Depot, and how I set up my timer from pulling it out of the box, putting batteries in it, connecting it to my phone, and all the little tips and tricks I use to also run irrigation to containers like grow bags and 5-gallon buckets that I like to place along the edges of my raised beds.
So here's the supplies I'll be using in this video. This is what it looks like to find the irrigation tubing in the irrigation section of Lowe's. Sometimes it's in the plumbing and irrigation section at Home Depot. You'll find different types of emitters, which I will not be using in this video, but I will show you multiple options. And this 1/2-inch poly tubing and 1/4-inch poly tubing that I use to connect everything, and female hose end and male hose end repair pieces as well. I connect those pieces of that 1/2-inch tubing with these types of connectors. There are a few different options between Lowe's and Home Depot, but I like this type because I can unscrew them and undo them to change my layout if I need to, and landscape staples to hold the tubing down. To connect a lot of my containers to that 1/2-inch tubing, I'm using these supplies, which I will show later on in this video. Now let's go over how I plan to lay out my irrigation. So when I'm designing the zones, I'm going for a path of least resistance, so I don't have as many corners or turns if I don't need them. And then I put extra lines in the design because that is what I'm going to run some 1/4-inch tubing to some containers from. Now, zone 2 is pretty much the same as zone 1 because this is a mirror image, but I'm just having to run the line up to where the beds are and then across the walkway. Now, I do have some beds that are not on this paper because I just added them, and I got to run lines from the last bed on the corner to that last area. And this is just an idea of what it looks like when I'm planning out running 1/4-inch lines in a garden plan to containers just like these along my trellises. Now I won't be irrigating this in this video, but as an example, zone 3 would be my in-ground garden that in person looks a little bit like this. It's kind of wonky, it's kind of morphed over the years, but it doesn't currently have any irrigation on it, and it's a lot to hand water because it's far from my hose outlet. So I'll be running the same 1/2-inch line tubing to this area, but then connecting a 1/2-inch line tubing that already has emitters in it. It looks just like the 1/4-inch tubing like this, but it's 1/2-inch, same color and everything, but it has emitters throughout, and I can just snake it around and landscape staple it down. So let's get our irrigation timer set up because it's time to move into that phase of things. I have the Beehive XD Smart Timer 4-port, and I got the one with the Wi-Fi hub. So first it wants me to connect the Wi-Fi hub. I plugged it into the wall, and then I allowed my phone to have access to that device, and it searches for the device, and within seconds it found it. And it was like, hey, double check that this is the device. I did, all good to go. And then it had me put in my current location or address. Now I'm connecting the actual timer, and it has some information on the bottom, and then it showed me where to put in batteries. So I put in some batteries because this timer runs off of batteries. But the batteries last a long time. Like, I still haven't changed the ones from a year ago when I installed this timer at a different garden. So it's connecting this to all the hub and my phone and looking for the devices. And it uses a kind of a combination of like Wi-Fi for some of the longer range stuff and Bluetooth for some of the shorter range stuff. And the device is up to date. And now it's time for me to go play around with testing out the zones. But first we need to connect it to the hose outlet. So I connected it to my hose outlet and I turned the hose on, and then I hit test and did a test run, and it looks like the water flows fine. So this is where I tell you to do as I say and not as I do, and put on a backflow preventer from your house to anything that is going to be left on, even if it's not continuously running. And I have a splitter that goes from my timer and also to my hose. Now we need to make that 1/2-inch tubing turn into a hose that I can connect to my timer. So I'm using a female hose in adapter. There's a couple different kinds. I'm going to use the metal kind today, but this one uses a reverse barb so that the tube can fit in there and it'll actually stay in place. So I need scissors and a flathead screwdriver for this. I've got my poly tubing, and I take my female hose in adapter and shove it in there. It has some reverse barbs, but we're going to make sure it stays on with the pressure of the water by tightening with our flathead screwdriver screwdriver so that the coupling is on there really, really good. Make sure that the rubber gasket is in place because you want to get a really good seal and connect that to your hose outlet or the timer in this case. I didn't really do a good job of doing that the first time, and I wanted to show you what it looks like when you test it and it fails, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. You just may need to retwist it on there better, and you can see I got it on there pretty good this time. And then I just tested again, and you'll see the hose over off the side of the screen is flowing with water. Now we need to make sure that this poly tubing can run across this walkway, but we don't want to kink it. So to get a sharp angle, run it down to the ground and then across the walkway, I'm using an elbow connector, and I'm taking the coupling off of one end of the connector. I slide it onto the tubing, and then I shove the tubing onto the connector. It has reverse barbs as well. So then I just twist that reverse back onto that connector, and it's a really nice tight seal, but I can undo this later if I really need to, and I change my mind all the time, so that's important. I give it a good test run and then put it down to the ground, make sure I have that measured properly, and repeat this same process by taking the coupling, putting the tube in, reverse twisting the coupling. Now I'm staking this down, and my grass grows over this really quickly, so you can worry about it being a tripping hazard. It's not really a tripping hazard for me. And then I'm measuring that out, and I'm going to use a T connector this time. So I'm going to run this 1/2 inch poly tubing or hose underneath my little edging here, and then I'm going to connect the T connector because I want to run a very short piece of this poly tubing with a male end hose adapter this time, male being something that goes inside of something. Okay, get my drift? And that is just going to allow me to connect into the manifold and riser system that comes with the Garden Minutes grid. They do have their own hoses that you can buy as well, but because I needed such a short piece, I just figured I'll DIY it. So I tighten that coupling right around the edge, and then that goes into my T connector, which then connects one hose going towards that area, one hose going into the manifold, and then leaves me open to then run another hose along the edge of the bed now. So I've successfully connected from my hose outlet and timer to the first set of beds, and now it's time to run the poly tubing along the front of this bed over to the edge, and then we're going to connect it to another elbow piece, which will then help me successfully bring it around this corner. This is the same setup as that same elbow piece I used to run my hose down to the ground and across my walkway. Same process, take your coupling, feed it onto the hose. I'm staking it down with a landscape staple and then running it along the far edge of the bed. Now this is the area where I'm going to put a T connector because I want to run some extra tubing inside the area where my trellis is, because this is where I plan to put some grow bags, and I want to be able to connect some tubing and irrigation to those grow bags. Now there's nicer ways to cap off the end of the 1/2 inch poly tubing, but for now I'm going to use this figure 8 hose end clamp. It literally is a figure 8, and then you clamp it over, and then it uses the pressure of the water when you turn the water on to where no water sprays out the end, and then I'm just leaving it here. Now it's time for me to connect the back corner of the garden design to the irrigation, and since this garden is just 4 of the same corners, I'm literally just doing the exact same thing that you just watched me do, and I didn't feel like you needed to watch that again. So here's where we're at so far. I've connected 8 beds to this irrigation. Now it's time to test the flow rate. The beds closest to the water outlet are always going to have a higher flow rate, and so I'm noticing some flooding initially in those first 2 beds, and this is the area where I mentioned that I'll be putting some grow bags. I'll run another line there eventually. I just ran out of connectors. And then this area I'm noticing on the back beds, there's good flow, but it's not the same as the flow in the front. So these manifolds come with adjusting valve kind of turning knobs. So I'm just adjusting those down and everything should even out. So this is where we're at now. We're setting up zone 2, which once again is almost the exact same. I'm just running the line across a pathway. And this is the back very corner. This is another type of connector that you can get. It just has reverse teeth, but this one you cannot undo. That's the only difference. And I have one last raised bed that I had not installed one of these Garden in Minutes irrigation grids in. So this is when I realized that I put it in backwards because it has a little spot where a riser goes, and I needed that riser to be in a certain area. So you can adjust the risers. It comes with an extra long one. You cut it to fit and it just pops into place. And then this extra piece right here is what connects it to a manifold. This allows you to connect multiple beds together. And then I did a little test run here because it's all set up with my timer and everything's good to go. At first, when you put in a new irrigation grid, some of these tubes can be turned and so it'll spray kind of wonky, but all you do is just reach in and adjust it, and then boom, an entire bed is irrigated just like that. So the raised beds are irrigated, and now it's time to connect some 1/4 inch tubing into where I want to put some containers along my beds. Now this is 1/4 inch tubing that actually has emitters built into it, which is super cool. And then we'll use 1/4 inch tubing that doesn't have holes in it to run using these 1/4 inch tubing connectors from the 1/2 inch poly tubing that we just laid out to these container. Now these are the Epic Gardening grow bags, and they're really cool because they were designed to have a spot where you can run 1/4 inch tubing up the side of it. And then I'm poking a hole in my 1/2 inch tubing and adding that 1/4 inch connector. It has a reverse barb, and then connecting the 1/4 inch tubing to that barb. I added another barb at the other end of the tubing where I'm connecting that to a cut piece of that brown 1/4 inch tubing that has emitters. The end of that 1/4 inch tubing with emitters is open because I cut it, and I'm going to put a goof plug at the end of it, which just literally seals it, stops water from coming out the end. I did a test run, and you can see I've got about 3 emitters worth of drippage happening in the bag, and it's working great. Now this is a different type of emitter that I have. It's called a root quencher spike, and it uses subsurface irrigation. It has adjustable flow with a cap on top, and you just connect 1/4 inch tubing right to the little barb that it has at the base of where you can adjust the flow. I'm doing the same thing. I'm connecting the 1/4 inch tubing just directly into that 1/2 inch tubing. Literally, you poke a light hole and then you just put the little 1/4 inch barb in there. I promise it'll seal. I'm showing these 2 different options because these are the 2 things I have on hand, but you can use regular octopus emitters that spray out, like normal emitters. They'll work just fine. As long as you know how to run this poly tubing, you can connect whatever you need.
So in total, I have 10 raised beds in this backyard, and then I have in-ground areas that I have things planted out, and then a lot of containers. So it took me about 3 days to fully get all the irrigation connected inside the raised beds, not because these irrigation grids from Garden in Minutes were difficult to install, but because I have joint pain with my autoimmune issues, and connecting the fittings to get to the beds where the irrigation grids are can be a little bit painful, but it's definitely something that could be done in 1 day's time frame with maybe about 3 to 4 hours of solid focused effort to get the raised beds connected and everything irrigated. And now watering most of my raised beds in my kitchen garden throughout the summer here in Texas is as simple as me pressing play or having an automated timer set on this app to where I can press a button and press play. And let's go see if it actually worked.
So right now I'm doing 10-minute soaks every 3 to 4 days because we are getting some rain, and so I won't irrigate on days it rains. And the containers that I've put on the drip irrigation are flourishing. And the flow has evened out nicely between the beds closer to the spigot and the ones further away.
Well, I'm not done irrigating the entire backyard, but this takes a lot of load off of my table of what I have to do to regularly irrigate and reduce my water usage when it comes to watering a lot of my vegetables in my raised kitchen garden. This is not an exhaustive list or technique when it comes to how to irrigate your garden, but it is one way to initially get you started. You guys hear me talk about these irrigation grids a lot from Garden in Minutes, but that's because they really were a game changer for me on consistently being able to irrigate my raised beds. So I've got a discount for you in the description of this video, and there's a link as well. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to drop them in the comments below. And I hope this video has given you more confidence to consider irrigating your garden so that you can spend more time enjoying your space and having healthy plants while reducing the water usage so that we can all be good stewards of the area that we choose to cultivate. Don't be afraid to get out there, get your hands dirty, maybe go to Home Depot and take a look at the irrigation section, because remember, if you never grow, you'll never know.